Here, but now they're gone. Romeo and Juliet are together in eternity. 40,000 men and women every day. 40,000 men and women every day. Another 40,000 coming every day. Come on, baby. Baby, take my hand. We'll be able to fly. Baby, I'm your man.
Welcome back to Pagan Valley, everyone. Just as the title of this video says, this is the second part of our investigation into the bizarre world of ALEXKANSAS, a strange analog horror series that involves monument monsters, alternate realities, and the coolest president in US history. If you haven't seen the ALEXKANSAS channel for yourself, I suggest you go check it out so he gets the views he rightfully deserves, and then come back and watch my part 1 analysis so you're all caught up with the series. And remember to comment down below your thoughts on the monument mythos after you like this video and subscribe to the channel. I can't believe how far this channel has gone in just a couple of months, and it's because of all of you. Anyway, let's get to what you came here for and continue our investigation into the monument mythos. The first video we are going to tackle tonight is one of my favorites, and I think it sets the tone for the rest of this analysis because it really introduces us to the bizarreness this series has become popular for. It is called Freedom Faller. This video starts with part 1 called The Sculptor. Let's take a look. So the American government hired out a sculptor to design the famous Freedom statue for Capitol Hill. However, when replacing the head of the statue, the sculptor mysteriously went missing. But he must have finished the project because the statue is being sent to America. Our next part is called Daughter, and according to the video, we'll be following the accounts of the sculptor from before's daughter. Let's see if we can find out what happened to him.
5 aprile. Gli schizzi di Papino della Libertà sono stupendi. Lei assomiglia alla mamma se fosse una regina. Ho chiesto a Papino se potesse fare una statua che mi somigliasse. Ha detto sì. 10 aprile. Oggi Papino è andato al suo studio. Gli ho chiesto se avesse già iniziato a lavorare alla mia statua ed ha continuato a sorridermi. Io credo di sì. Papino è molto gentile. 13 aprile. Non abbiamo avuto notizie di papà per un po' di giorni. È già successo in passato, dato che è solito lavorare al suo studio per tanto tempo, ma la mamma oggi era molto preoccupata. È andata nel suo studio dopo avermi messo a letto. 15 aprile. Mamma è tornata a casa stanotte e è andata dritta verso la sua stanza. 16 aprile. Oggi è venuto un ispettore, ci ha chiesto di Papino e poi è andato nella stanza della mamma. Un paio di momenti dopo sono arrivati più uomini. Mamma stava piangendo. Continuano a gridare: lei ha i suoi occhi, lei ha i suoi occhi. Ero spaventata. Sono scappata via dalla casa. 18 aprile. Ricordo Papino dire alla mamma come la statua sarebbe stata messa in una nave chiamata Monarca. Sono andata al porto e l'ho trovata ancorata là vicino. Accanto alla nave c'erano alcune scatole. Parti della libertà erano in ciascuna di esse. Mi sono intrufolata in una scatola che era vuota. Spero che venga mandata dove sta Papino. Sento il suo spirito vicino alla libertà. 21 aprile. Sono molto affamata. Le scatole sono legate con una corda, quindi non posso uscire da sola. C'è un forte rumore nella stanza, come dell'argilla trascinata per il pavimento. Posso sentire le corde che vengono tagliate e qualcosa di grosso uscire da una scatola. È Papino? Ci sono molti altri suoni, come legno che si rompe. Dato che le corde sono rotte, sono uscita in fretta dalla scatola ed ho trovato del pane e della frutta nella stanza accanto. Mi sono sbagliata. Non è Papino, ma ha i suoi occhi. 24 aprile. Ho paura a rientrare di nuovo nella scatola. Ieri ha fatto suoni più rumorosi. Mentre cercavo per del cibo, credo che mamma mi abbia vista. La scatola è l'unico posto per nascondersi. Le corde continuano ad essere rotte da quella cosa con gli occhi di Papino. Ho paura che quella cosa o quell'uomo possano aprire la mia scatola. Non scriverò più molto, perché ho paura di fare rumore. Scriverò nuovamente quando arriverò sulla terraferma. 29 aprile. La cosa con gli occhi di papà oggi mi ha presa. Mi ha tenuta mentre correva attraverso la giungla. La sua spada ha tagliato centinaia di alberi. Non ho potuto vedere molto nel buio, ma ho potuto vedere gli occhi di papà fissarmi da quelle palpebre metalliche. Siamo scesi giù per un buco e in una grotta profonda. Dopo avermi messo a terra, ha acceso un fuoco colpendo le sue braccia contro delle pietre. Ormai è da ore che affila la sua spada con le rocce, ma non ho mai guardato la lama. Oggi, sin da quando ho iniziato a scrivere, la cosa con gli occhi di Papino ha fissato me.
So the original sculptor seems to have been killed by his creation, which isn't so hard to believe considering monuments all over America have these monsters within them. But the sculptor's daughter boarded the ship that was to take freedom to America. However, it seems that the sculpture came to life and took the sculptor's daughter to hide somewhere in the Americas. The next part is called Captain and seems to be covering excerpts from the logs of the Monarca shipping vessel. Maybe we can find out what happened on that ship.
6 casse sono state caricate all'alba. Sono pesanti. Ciascuna di esse contiene una parte di una grossa scultura. L'ispettore Montalbano mi ha detto che si tratta della dea della libertà. Ogni cassa è stata fissata con delle corde nel ripostiglio. Nessuno scorrimento è possibile. Lasciamo Livorno nel pomeriggio. Un gruppo di 5, 2 compagni, un cuoco e me stesso. 21 aprile. Siamo in ritardo. La nave è più lenta del previsto. Tommaso stamattina ha trovato 2 grossi buchi nel ripostiglio. Le scatole erano anche slegate. Il gruppo non proferì parola al riguardo. Sospetto sia solo frutto di scherzi dei compagni più giovani. I fori sono stati tappati con il catrame. Mi aspetto di poter sbarcare presto per fare ripari. 24 aprile. Il gruppo è teso. Nicola e Pietro la scorsa notte hanno visto uno sconosciuto vagare tra i ponti. Abbiamo cercato ma non abbiamo trovato nulla. Buchi più grandi sono stati trovati nel ripostiglio. Le scatole erano nuovamente slegate. C'è molta acqua nella nave. Ci stiamo muovendo molto lentamente. Non ho nessuna spiegazione per il danno. 26 aprile. Pietro e Tommaso hanno visto nuovamente lo sconosciuto. Un'altra ricerca che ci ha portato a nulla. Abbiamo trovato altri 3 buchi nel ripostiglio. Le casse sono state trovate nuovamente slegate. Abbiamo spostato le 6 casse dal ponte per prevenire il danno dell'acqua. 27 aprile. A crepuscolo ho visto lo sconosciuto a bordo. Stava cercando di entrare nella cassa. È scappato appena mi ha visto. Non l'abbiamo trovato seppur cercandolo. 29 aprile. Siamo atterrati a Gibraltar all'alba. La nave ci ha messo ore per approdare nel porto. C'erano molti buchi nel ripostiglio. Ciascuno di essi ha permesso ad enormi quantità d'acqua di entrare. Senza il catrame saremmo affondati in 3 giorni. Abbiamo aperto le casse per gli ufficiali della dogana. Le casse erano vuote.
So now we know one big fact. The goddess of freedom did not escape the shipping vessel in America. She and the sculptor's daughter escaped to the Rock of Gibraltar. Let's move on to the next part, Commissioner.
On the morning of April 29th, we received numerous reports regarding a tremendous force that rushed up the rock, which tore down hundreds of trees and created several landslides throughout the previous night. One civilian likened the phenomena to the work of a gigantic crazed fella. Due to the sheer number of reports and the high level of concern in the surrounding community, I deployed myself along with 13 officers to the rock in search of an explanation. We discovered that there was indeed a newly forged trail through the dense foliage stretching almost the entire height of the rock. The trail was astonishingly linear, with no bends in the path. The cuts to the trees themselves were precise. The downed trees continued to be warm to the touch, presumably due to the extreme speed of this force. A few fires present along the trail were extinguished by fellow officers as we traversed the rock. The path ended at a large crevice in the ground, which looked to be an entrance to a large underground cavern. After requesting additional men and equipment, Officer Hadley descended into the crevice. It was not long until Hadley exclaimed in fright and urged us all to enter. Within the following hour, the majority of us were in the cavern, which appeared to be an undiscovered offshoot of St. Michael's Cave. In the middle of the location stood a plaster model of a tall Greco-Roman statue of a woman. Surrounding this sculpture were the splayed remains of an individual, flattened like a set of clothes. A hollowed-out torso was stretched a quarter of the way up the statue, the sight of which compelled a few of the officers to exit the cavern. The human remains were collected and sent to the morgue, while the sculpture was cleaned and lifted out. The statue's blade, held in its right hand, matched the cuts present on the downed trees. Despite the fantastical implications of this detail, the Gibraltar police force officially concludes that the work of the crazed fella was nothing more than the result of heavy winds. During a secondary investigation, a journal was discovered in the cavern. A translation of its Italian text is in progress.
Alright, so we were just given some crucial information. Firstly, the Statue of Freedom is horrifically powerful by the description of how it carved its way up the Rock of Gibraltar. Secondly, the sculptor's daughter was described as lying flat like in a pile of clothes. What other victims of these statues were also found flattened? The ones at the bottom of the Washington Monument. Let's move on to the next part called Craftsman.
Arrives the tight-knit wooden ship. The plaster body is absent. Instead, a tall, wounded woman, sleeping in its vessel, donning a helmet wrapped in a robe, clutching a sword and a damaged shield. Overheard a conversation with the captain, a violent conflict with freedom at the port in Gibraltar. They tell me inside her is the plaster, and I walk away, silently believing freedom craved liberation so terribly she tried to take it for herself. But off the ship, she was dragged away. Freedom locked up. Freedom in chains. They tell me I have to take it out of her. So hook, rope, peel, and pull. When it was done, freedom stood motionless. Freedom stood still. I see the final bronze woman, and I feel as if, maybe even hope, she is only dormant now, and will awaken again.
So now we've learned that the statue was barely even a statue when it escaped Gibraltar. It was almost entirely a woman, but when the police eventually recaptured her, they somehow peeled off her skin so that the plaster was all that was left, making her into an actual statue, which is so fucking weird and awesome in a terrifying way. After she was returned to being a statue, Freedom eventually made it to Washington, D.C., where she was placed on top of the Capitol building. Let's see the last part of this video, which is simply called Sculpture. It seems we are back in the James Dean reality where these monsters exist, because anti-Dean associates attacked the Capitol building. Let's see if they accidentally disturbed Freedom during their protest. Yeah, so the ADA group went way too far in their protest of the president. Apparently, gunning down the goddess of freedom woke her up like the craftsman warned us about. Now she's freely roaming the entire Capitol building, causing God knows what type of damage to the public. But here's the million-dollar question right now. Did the Anti-Dean Association target the goddess of freedom because they knew of the monster within it? Let's go to our next video and try to find out more. Our next video tonight is called May's Movie Maker, and by the title, I'm hoping we finally get to learn more about this nefarious media and tech corporation. Our video begins with this old ad for what looks like the first personal computer. After that ad, I realized that the Maze logo is an ear of corn that looks like a circuit board, and maize is just a type of corn grown wild in fields. Sort of like another wild plant we've seen humans interact with from the wild. But anyway, we are then shown the amount of manufacturing plants between 1960 and 1971. Take a look at that layout. It's almost like the pattern of quote-unquote plants that are stretched out around most of the country, which is odd.
Members of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission wanted to know about the mandatory recall of all personal computers. Personal computers may pose a risk to American lives and infrastructure. Promptly dispose of your computer at a local hazardous tech collection center. Your safety is of the utmost importance to us.
Wait a minute, catch that at the very end? We were told by the US government that our Fourth Amendment rights do not apply, and the Fourth Amendment protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. In other words, your privacy is now being revoked because of the Mays personal computers. Now we are getting a history lesson about the Mays Corporation. In 1960, Mays Machines is founded by Rob Carrier and Rob Watroba. Then in 1969, President Dean establishes the Department of Technology and basically combines all the tech companies underneath the government.
Now this delegation pays him this ovation and rises to its feet.
In 1970, Mays produced the first personal video camera and home computer. Then in 1972, Mays teams up with the Department of Defense to set up the TMFDs, or the True Forces of Mass Destruction. In 1980, Mays was attacked. Our video then quickly moves on to 1990, where the last American personal computer is shut down. But why? In 2000, we are told the Mays Corporation has learned from their mistakes. Control is confidence, and today there are no doubts. With the new Mays Movie Maker, now you can take control. We are then shown a company video of what is under the Mays manufacturing plants. On one of them, we are told, "Beware the monuments, they are all connected." Then we are shown another that says, "The military-industrial complex grows." Then we are shown the underground caves underneath the manufacturing plants, saying the caves were quiet and humid. There were no light fixtures or any pieces of equipment. No animals, not even bugs. It felt so empty. What happened here? We are then shown something familiar to us. Then we are told not to visit the plants because they haven't been fed in years. So this video has 100% confirmed that Mays is in league with both James Dean and the Special Tree Monuments. But it's even worse than that. Like that graffiti said, the Special Trees and the Monster Monuments are a part of an entire military-industrial complex involving the presidency, the tech giants, and America's national defense. Well, when said out loud, maybe this alternate reality isn't too different from our own. Anyway, let's move on and see how much influence Mays actually has over the American people. Our next video is titled Suez Canal Crab, but before we take a look at it, just some quick context. This video was posted on April 29th, 2021, which, if you follow world news, was a month following the absolutely insane event where a cargo vessel in the Suez Canal in Egypt got turned around sideways for 6 days, basically halting the entire economy of Europe. I don't really need to dive deeper into the details, but in this video, we're going to see what happens in this James Dean reality when this event happens. Our video begins with a graphic showing the Ever Given cargo ship sailing through the canal. We are then shown that Hillary Clinton won the 2016 election and is being covered by the Maze News Network. President Clinton announces this to the press. For the last 2 weeks, the container ship Ever Given has obstructed the Suez Canal. With every passing hour, it is costing the global economy over $400 million. At the request of the Egyptian president, the United States will end this crisis with nuclear force. Both Congress and the United Nations Security Council have approved the use of a small thermonuclear weapon on the Suez Canal, several miles from the Ever Given's location. The blast itself will not reach the ship. However, the waves generated are expected to dislodge the Ever Given from its current position. Evacuation of the cities along the waterway are in progress. Then we see the nuclear blast go off and hit the ship. But the Ever Given does something strange when it gets hit by those radiation waves. We are then shown tweets from this alternate realities version of Twitter until we see something truly extraordinary. We are shown that the UN decided to not destroy this living cargo ship just walking around Egypt, saying the crab cannot be eliminated without causing great damage to the Ever Given. In this day and age, the world is unprepared for a loss of cargo of such magnitude. Therefore, the Suez Canal crab will not be destroyed. At this time, no containers will be lifted from the ship, since low-flying aircraft cause the organism to ambulate unsteadily. In hopes of returning the Ever Given back to the sea, efforts are underway to carefully manipulate the crab's route through Egypt. We get to see this attempt to stop the crab, but instead the Suez Canal crab heads straight into Cairo, Egypt. Where our video then becomes a TV network show called Dr. Disturbing, where real-life footage of Cairo is made to look like the crab is really walking through it.
It's your first visit here, so what do you think about this tower? I thought it was a really good tower. It was very interesting to go up it. It gave you a really good sense of how busy Cairo is, so I really enjoyed it.
That was terrific. It was really great to get kind of a sense of the scale of the city. It's kind of difficult to do that when you're walking around down on the street.
It's a breathtaking view, and it really gives you a terrific perspective of the whole city. And I loved it up there. I spent a couple of hours up on the top.
Due to evacuations around the Suez Canal, millions traveled to Cairo in search of housing. In response to this migration, many building capacity limits for popular attractions were inflated. The Cairo Tower, one of the tallest buildings in Egypt, had its own recommended capacity limit increased from 700 persons to 1,000. On the evening of April 16, 2021, upwards of 1,200 visitors toured the Cairo Tower at once. Although concerns of overcrowding had been raised by several staff members, the building manager dismissed their comments. Since the Suez Canal crab would be passing by later in the evening, he also encouraged visitors to enter the upper levels of the tower, as that would provide a better vantage point. At 8 p.m., the Suez Canal crab was observed to have turned toward the Cairo Tower and proceeded to approach. Despite an alert sent out by the Egyptian government for civilians to immediately vacate structures in the crab's path, most visitors ignored the warning and stayed on the upper levels of the Cairo Tower as it came near. At 8:15 p.m., the Suez Canal crab was seen to have stumbled, and in an attempt to regain its balance, crashed into one side of the Cairo Tower, killing over 200 people. The resulting tremors that traversed the building damaged its staircases and elevator systems beyond repair. The cascade of shipping containers from the Ever Given, knocked forward by the momentum of the initial stumble, lasted for over 2 minutes, as an estimated 800 containers broke from their locks and pushed forward an additional 1,000 containers. As all 1,800 containers tumbled down through the building, the structural integrity of the Cairo Tower rapidly diminished. Falling debris and containers are reported to have killed over 800 visitors. At 8:19 p.m., the Cairo Tower fully collapsed, dragging the immobilized Suez Canal crab into the ground. In total, only 39 of the 1,189 visitors of the Cairo Tower survived. 2 of the 15 staff members escaped to safety, including the building manager. None of the 6 security guards survived. Although paramedics and police officers had arrived shortly before the Cairo Tower's collapse, the visibly unstable tower prompted them to collect survivors on the ground and retreat to a safe distance.
So the crab finally fell down in the middle of Cairo, and the people around it were evacuated. Let's see how the Egyptian government take cares of that.
At 8:41 p.m., a hazardous waste collection team and soldiers of the Egyptian ground forces arrived to contain survivors within mobile quarantine chambers. Due to fears of a potential contagion contracted from the Suez Canal crab, all civilians in the vicinity were placed in quarantine under the authority of Egypt's military in collaboration with the Ministry of Health. Upon impact with the ground, the Suez Canal crab and the Ever Given separated. The large wounds caused by the separation discharged thousands of gallons of seawater and bodily fluids. The hazardous waste collection team and soldiers attempted to plug the gushing lesions. However, survivors report that their efforts were mostly futile due to the team's inability to stay standing on the slippery ground. With the number of accidental falls among the troops on the increasingly wet ground, the Egyptian army diverted its focus from closing wounds on the Suez Canal crab to evacuation efforts. By midnight, the civilian population within a 3-mile radius of the fallen Cairo Tower had been completely evacuated. On the morning of April 17th, Egyptian authorities publicly announced that the Suez Canal crab had fallen in Cairo and laid in a vegetative state. Although the Cairo exclusion zone was primarily intended to prevent any media coverage of the crab and the surrounding destruction, several journalists managed to record footage of the site through the assistance of private helicopter pilots. By 8 a.m., clips of the crab were trending on Twitter. Members of the Anti-Device Association attributed the severity of the disaster to the development of intelligent devices, specifically Twitter machines.
Let's pause again. The Anti-Device Association, or ADA. We've heard of another organization like that one from decades ago, the Anti-Dean Association, also titled the ADA. But if we remember from earlier, we don't know who the Anti-Dean Association is loyal to and what their true intentions are.
They reasoned that due to the popularity of Twitter in America, the Ever Given was overstocked with T-machines, which weighed the ship down and consequently caused the initial obstruction of the Suez Canal. On Twitter, the ADA released a vicious string of messages criticizing Twitter, Hillary Clinton, and Egypt. Along with images of the Suez Canal crab, photos of scattered goods that had fallen out of the shipping containers became a popular topic of discussion. One image of a sports car resting on top of debris would be retweeted by the ADA with the caption, "The Cairo exclusion zone is a conspiracy to keep goods in Egypt," The American people have been robbed. The tweet was shared by over 10 million users. Taking notice, the ADA followed up with tweets suggesting that an Egyptian soldier had driven home the sports car in the image, and that the goods needed to be rescued by their rightful owners. The ADA deemed April 19th as Finders Keepers Day and urged all Americans to travel to Egypt to obtain the goods left by the fallen Suez Canal crab. Overnight, an estimated 12,000 flights to Cairo were booked by American citizens. Although a few trespassers had been apprehended in the Cairo exclusion zone, officials did not foresee any further disruptions at the site. Medical personnel attended to survivors in the quarantine chambers. Soldiers cleared rubble and attempted to control the spread of the Suez Canal crab's bodily fluids. By 5 a.m. on April 19th, approximately 20 million gallons had been contained through aerial drops of sawdust and an extensive effort to mop the premises. Although several officials discussed a plan to lay down military-grade mats to enable the hazardous material collection team to walk up to the crab for closer analysis, it was ultimately decided that no further action would be taken until the following evening, as it was believed that the midday sun would evaporate most of the fluid. At 12 p.m., over 12,000 Americans gathered in front of the gated entrance of the Cairo exclusion zone. 4,000 Egyptian police officers and soldiers stood behind the perimeter to guard the exclusion zone from trespassers. At 12:03 p.m., violence erupted when an American shot a police officer in the face. Consequently, tear gas was used on the raging mob. Tanks and heat rays arrived shortly afterwards to deter any trespassers. However, by 12:10 p.m., the front entrance gates of the Cairo exclusion zone collapsed from the force of the charging crowd. Informed of the approaching Americans, medical personnel and survivors at the epicenter began to vacate the premises. By 12:43 p.m., the first Americans were seen by officials at the epicenter. Although the wet ground was expected to significantly slow their approach, several citizens had arrived earlier than anticipated since they had utilized car hubcaps to slide quickly across the ground. With no law enforcement at the scene, the American citizens began to collect fallen goods and pry open shipping containers. Popular goods included furniture, firearms, processed food, tea machines, bars of gold, automobiles, and designer clothing. As Americans continued to arrive at the epicenter, more injuries from accidental falls were observed. Concussions and broken arms were the most common injuries during the initial break-in. At 1 p.m., several fights broke out over a Ford pickup truck that had rolled out from a container and crushed a family. 3 aggressors were shot by a man who had found a rifle. The conflict fueled an unpleasant atmosphere, with more instances of gun violence as time went on. One notable incident saw the discovery of a container of firearms by a group of young children. The accidental firing of an automatic weapon by one child prompted the intervention of their parents and other adults. The resulting verbal argument escalated quickly and broke out into a full-scale gunfight with over 14 armed subjects, including the children. Another fight erupted after the discovery of a deluxe barbecue grill, which 13 Americans had simultaneously called dibs on when the item was pulled out of a shipping container. All 13 Americans died from gun-related wounds. When the last wave of the 12,000 Americans had entered the epicenter, overcrowding ensured that the accidental fall of one individual would trigger a continuous series of additional falls. Without any open space for the midday sunlight to reach the wet ground, the bodily fluid had no time to evaporate, and the number of falls steadily increased. At around 1:30 p.m., one of the posterior legs of the Suez Canal crab twitched and incited panic in a nearby crowd. As Americans attempted to flee, many fell on the slippery ground and were trampled by those rushing behind them. By 1:33 p.m., the screams of the panicked crowd had reached a deafening volume, reportedly being heard over 5 miles away. Due to the reinforcement of the Cairo exclusion zone's gates and orders from the Ministry of Health to prevent any American citizen from leaving the exclusion zone, the massive crowds were kept inside the 3-mile radius of the epicenter, held in place by an orderly line of tanks that flanked the entirety of the zone's perimeter. The gates stood for over 6 hours as Americans ran from the epicenter, Many soldiers became ill at the sight of injuries caused by the thousands of bodies being crushed into the metal bars. By 7:15 p.m., everyone within a half-mile of the gate had perished from extreme pressure. Heat exhaustion, accidental falls, and gun violence were also major causes of death. The Cairo exclusion zone gates were opened at 8 p.m. Soldiers searched for the remaining survivors. Of the over 12,000 Americans who had arrived, only 944 survived. 77 of the American survivors were found kneeling around the Suez Canal crab and claimed to have been promised from a deity that they would survive if they prayed to the crab. However, none of them could account for the remains of dead worshippers that littered the ground around them. They would later establish the Church of the Ever Given during their stay at a local hospital. Howard Melrose, an American journalist permitted to visit the Cairo exclusion zone the day after the stampede, said of the site, "It looked like something from a medieval painting. All of their bodies were jammed into each other. Everyone became one."
So we've seen this activity before. Whatever the Suez Canal crab was, it wanted humans to perish around it, much like the special trees we've seen in previous videos. And who organized the 12,000 Americans? The ADA on Twitter. And who invented Twitter in this reality? The Maze Tech Company, who supported President Dean. Even long after James Dean is gone, Maze is truly the eternal villain for the American people that won't go away with time. They are manipulating the people literally to their deaths. The next video is called Dean Disaster and is another documentary on President James Dean. Let's take a listen.
During a broadcast of ABC Evening News, anchor Frank Reynolds told viewers to be prepared for tomorrow and that they would witness the start of a glorious adventure. Word spread quickly throughout the country, and civilians invited friends and family to their homes in anticipation of the next day. Although no details of this glorious adventure were known, it was widely presumed to be another exciting TV announcement from President James Dean. Watching parties were organized in living rooms across America, and on the evening of May 13, 1969, after the ABC Evening News ended, televisions were closely watched with millions of unblinking eyes. No one wanted to miss what President Dean had to say.
James Dean's America is hell. But you still don't believe us. You'll hear the truth from James Dean himself.
Immediately following the broadcast, air raid sirens activated across all 50 states. The sirens blared at a far greater volume than usual and burst the eardrums of every civilian within a 4-mile radius. The resulting panic triggered severe overcrowding at bomb shelters and deadly stampedes in the streets. Thousands were trampled and hospitals were overwhelmed within the hour. Fires broke out in all major cities, and cars left running in the streets produced lethal amounts of carbon monoxide, which flowed into poorly ventilated bomb shelters and suburban homes. In Washington, D.C., the White House was placed into lockdown immediately after the TV hijacking, and President Dean was rushed to a maximum security underground bunker. Able to hear the anguished screams of civilians in the streets above, Dean refused to stay in the shelter. When carbon monoxide alarms went off in the bunker, he urged his staff to exit the White House with him and shut off the vehicles left on the roadways. With a phone call, Dean mobilized the National Guard to assist with the deactivation of the millions of parked vehicles across America. Several more phone calls to high-ranking military officials and world leaders revealed that no nuclear missiles had in fact been launched. President Dean soon realized that the air raid sirens had been hijacked by a domestic organization and immediately ordered all forces of the military to disable every active siren in the nation. When military technicians arrived at the location of the sirens, they found that the bodies of prior technicians, who had perished from the combination of stress and the siren's sheer volume, piled so high as to have formed a ramp to the top of the speakers. The overcrowding of streets by civilians and unaccompanied cars frequently blocked the path of emergency vehicles and prolonged the process of disarming the sirens. Against his advisors' wishes, President Dean tasked himself with the deactivation of an air siren near the White House. Although he would accomplish the task fairly quickly, Dean sustained permanent ear damage and was rendered fully deaf. The sheer volume had also caused countless blood vessels in his body to burst and produce several abdominal hernias. His condition was shared among the millions of other Americans who had been near the sirens at the time of their activation. 3 hours would pass before all air raid sirens would be fully disabled. The next morning, at the advice of federal authorities, civilians slowly made their way from the shelters back to their homes. Although some continued to stay in the shelters for fear of radioactive fallout, most accepted the explanation given by military officials over the radio. There is no nuclear holocaust. A domestic terrorist organization hijacked the sirens of America. The streets were littered with bodies and automobiles. The National Guard handed out blindfolds to the young, sick, and elderly as they exited the shelters to prevent the scenes of bloodshed from causing fainting spells and heart attacks. At the Walt Disney Medical Center, physicians examined President Dean and other members of his staff who helped disarm the sirens. All were diagnosed with severe hearing loss. Against his doctor's advice, Dean insisted on issuing a public statement on the traumatic events that had transpired. Although he initially wanted to appear on live television, a glance at the mirror discouraged him, as he saw the countless bruises and tears present on his skin due to the intensity of the sirens. In coordination with technicians from the Department of Defense, President Dean instead organized a large-scale radio broadcast, utilizing the very air raid sirens they had disabled. Later that night, a bruised Frank Reynolds would announce on ABC Evening News that Dean would speak through the sirens and that captions would be displayed simultaneously on television for viewers who were hard of hearing.
It's Jimmy speaking. I'm sorry, very sorry for what's come to pass. I wish I could bring back your friends, your family. I want to fix everything. This is not the announcement I planned for. But as you know, there are people who have it in for us. The Anti-Dean Association. They hijack our systems. They hurt people. The Anti-Dean Association is an anti-American association. I want you to keep an eye out for them. They will not be hard to find because they are very proud of their silly ideas. Find them and bring them to your local authorities. We'll make things right. We have places for people like them. This is Jimmy, signing off.
Oh shit. Let's pause before we have President Dean speak again. So we were right in not trusting James Dean, but his political influence is radicalizing not only the ADA, but also radicalizing his own supporters into doing whatever the government tells them to do, including sacrificing themselves to the national monuments, where in previous videos we learned the victims of the monuments don't die, but they do come back with physical changes, and now they come back more subdued and brainwashed than ever before. These special trees, the monsters in the monuments, are officially in charge, and just like in our world, they've popularized a celebrity into the office of presidency, creating absolute chaos between the ADA extremists and the Dean democracy. With all that being said, let's listen to President Dean, but perhaps in a more cautious way now.
Over the next week, hundreds of thousands of anti-Deaners would be apprehended and sent to correctional facilities around the United States. These facilities, meant for the anti-American, were aptly located near or at national monuments in order to symbolize a return to American virtues. Most would stay for merely a few weeks before being released again. Friends and family of rehabilitated anti-Deaners frequently claimed that they would have improved personalities, no recollection of their past criminal activities, and even slightly altered physical appearances. These methods were so effective in calming the terrorist that many innocent civilians requested themselves to be sent to these facilities in hopes of radically changing their lives. However, federal authorities would deny any admission to those who were not affiliated with the ADA. During one address, President Dean acknowledged the high volume of requests from the public.
I get it. Those who come out of these places, they'll clean as a whistle. But if we send you to those places too, then those correctional facilities lose their purpose. If we send everyone to prison, then what's a prison anymore? This is Jimmy signing off.
On the morning of May 22nd, 9 days after the disaster, President Dean received a state-of-the-art hearing implant from Maze Machines, an up-and-coming tech company. Around noon at the Walt Disney Medical Center, the device was surgically inserted into Dean. The sound quality of the implant and the speedy nature of the surgery inspired Dean to imagine a new government department, which would be able to oversee the mass production and distribution of quality hearing implants to the American public. That evening, President Dean requested an emergency session of Congress and proposed the ambitious project.
I can't hear a damn thing. Did you hear me? I can't hear a damn thing. Neither can you, or you, or you, or you. It doesn't matter whether you were near the sirens or not. None of you are listening. We need to bring together those technology companies to build and send hearing devices that the public needs. Hearing devices that you yourself need. And through a collaboration with the Department of Health, we can give back to the people what our failures took away. We can let a mother hear her child laugh again, and let a man hear his dog again. We can give everyone their hearing again. And who's stopping you? Listen to the public. You're all about deadlines too. So here's one. By July 4th, I want every American to hear the fireworks.
Okay, so not only is the US government another pawn to these entities, but there is also this Maze company that not only controls part of the news, but is also producing the hearing aids for the public. Let's talk about those hearing aids. Remember the descriptions of the special trees whenever they came alive to attack humans? They would produce music that almost brainwashed the people. I'm telling you, this series will turn you into a government conspiracy theorist by the end. Because think about it, if the ADA caused the Dean disaster, then wasn't that super lucky for the government and the special trees that now they had a perfect reason to implant the US population with a device that literally makes it easier for them to control the people? I'm going to bet that this attack by the ADA wasn't actually done by anti-Dean protesters. I think James Dean and this Mays Media Company caused the tragedy just so all these events would play out. This is what I meant by this series by ALEXKANSAS being unlike any analog horror series before. Not only are we getting an alternate history, but we are also watching some new entity take control of the people.
Due to a malfunction in his auditory implants, Dean was unable to hear himself and as a result spoke much louder on the Senate floor than on previous occasions. The volume of his speech, which greatly amplified his compassion for the American people, profoundly affected the senators, and in the early hours of May 23, 1969, after 10 hours of discussion, the Department of Technology was approved. It was the fastest an executive department had ever been established. By May 27th, all persons with hearing loss attributed to the anti-Dean disaster would be eligible for the surgical implantation of a hearing device free of charge. Mass operating rooms would be established throughout the U.S., able to house over 1,000 patients at once. The use of surgical androids was approved on June 6th, which increased the number of surgeries performed per day over 250%. Once all victims had been treated, those with deafness unrelated to the disaster also became eligible for the surgery. On July 4th, it was announced that there was no incidence of severe hearing loss in the country. The United States was the first nation in the world to eradicate deafness. The achievement had been expected for some time since its first mention during Dean's congressional address. In preparation, many health organizations, both domestic and international, had prepared to host banquets for Dean and grant awards to him and his staff. However, President Dean spent the entirety of Independence Day racing cars with close friend Richard Nixon at a local speedway. Though many would cite the recovery from the anti-Dean disaster as James Dean's finest hour, the president was never willing to accept responsibility.
All we did was fix some ears.
But let's move on to our next video and try to find out more, which is called Giza Guardian. It begins by saying, weather permitting, we will carry a feed of the starry Sphinx in Giza on July 4th. Which was written by Mays News Network, a company we have seen influencing the public on behalf of the government earlier. Wait a minute, were all those special trees. They rose up, bent over into loops, and our connection went out when we saw that burst of lightning. All these things we've seen these trees do before. So there are way more of these trees than we had originally thought. Let's keep watching.
Throughout the 19th century, English archaeologists in Egypt encountered stories time and again of mysterious lightning strikes near the Great Pyramids of Giza. It was reported that the lightning would strike only in the presence of certain rare constellations. However, no one outside of the Bedouin tribes knew of which constellations. The secrecy protected the value of Giza glass, a mineral created by the strange lightning striking the desert sand. The glass also served as a form of black market currency for several tribes. For decades, the Bedouins' knowledge eluded British archaeologists. For as long as the constellations remained unknown, the Giza glass that formed was retrieved by the Bedouins long before anyone else arrived. However, in the late 1870s, British Egyptologist Flinders Petrie discovered the constellation which preceded the electrical phenomenon. In 1880, he arranged an expedition to collect samples of Giza glass for the British Museum. Petrie accurately predicted the appearance of Giza glass, and with the help of British troops, secured the location of the glass for themselves. The glass, which formed in long multi-layered sheets, was fractured in order to be more easily transported. While collecting fragments, Petrie slipped and landed on an upright plane of Giza glass. The force of the fall, combined with the sharpness of the material, decapitated Petrie immediately. While British troops at the scene quickly assumed Petrie had been killed, a closer inspection revealed that he was still alive. Although his head was separated from his body, Petrie remained conscious and could even mouth rudimentary words. Medical personnel were initially relieved Petrie had somehow survived, but they became concerned when his head began to discolor and swell significantly. But the fate of Flinders Petrie is a tale for another day. Petrie's lot, as his collection of Giza glass came to be known, arrived in England in 1891. Unfortunately, due to the poor handling of its containers during transit, the glass arrived broken into thin shards and was deemed worthless by museum curators. Yet, as a token of international diplomacy, the British Museum divided Petrie's lot among visiting American ambassadors. Vaguely aware of Giza glass's odd properties, President John D. Rockefeller ordered the immediate confiscation of the material from the American ambassadors. Although many in his administration were eager to see the glass be used in warfare, President Rockefeller refused to authorize military use and instead discussed other possible applications with the head of the Department of the Interior. After numerous conferences, it was settled that segments of Giza glass would be polished into fine blades and given to a select group of Greco-Egyptian swordsmen. These unusually tall swordsmen were assigned to the Grand Canyon and guarded restricted areas from trespassers. Protected under federal law, the Grand Canyon Guardians continued to serve for decades until the last member was discontinued. All trespassers who were maimed by the Guardians were promised a lifetime's worth of a special concoction which controlled unwanted side effects. However, since the medication's efficacy decreased over time, older victims were promised housing within the Grand Canyon to guarantee their safety and privacy from the outside world, but only under the condition that they would lure known dangerous persons wanted by the federal government to the forbidden zones of the national park.
Okay, that took a minute, but what the hell was just described to us? First, British people took a bunch of this precious Giza glass, but the lead archaeologist accidentally decapitated himself on it, only for the glass to be considered worthless by the British museums. Then President Rockefeller bought the worthless glass suddenly and made it into swords that would be given to specialized swordsmen called the Giza Guardians. These guards were Egyptian looking, but guarded something hidden in the Grand Canyon, and when trespassers were caught, they were used to lure more people wanted by the government. Sounds awfully familiar to what we saw after Dean disaster. After all, if these special trees needed humans, but none of the monuments were built yet, they must have been living in national parks like the Grand Canyon where it was easy to hide in plain sight. Let's keep watching.
Thomas odiava l'America. È andato a Roma quando era un 21enne e ci è rimasto per il resto della sua vita. Era divertito dal fatto che la proprietà degli schiavi americani lo volesse per creare una statua chiamata Libertà. All'inizio Thomas non voleva aiutarli, ma poi realizzò che la statua poteva diventare un simbolo per altre persone. Dietro alla statua un berretto della libertà, qualcosa che gli schiavi romani liberati indossavano. Penso che se una statua alta 6 metri di una donna liberata si ergesse sulla cupola del Campidoglio, alcuni uomini sarebbero stati meno ignoranti. Puoi immaginare quanto deluso fosse quando il signor Davis a Washington gli disse di togliere il cappello dalla libertà. Ma Thomas vedette che il suo progetto andare a buon fine. Andò persino in Egitto per trovare il materiale per la sua spada. È un vetro molto particolare, vetro di Giza. Una volta, mentre stava affinando il vetro nella sua officina, si tagliò accidentalmente la punta di un dito. Nonostante fossi preoccupata quando me lo disse, lui non riusciva a smettere di ridere. Mi disse che il vetro era così tagliente che la punta del suo dito si affettò senza dolore né sangue. Però poteva comunque sentirla. Quando Thomas si concentrava, poteva addirittura farla contrarre sul tavolo. Lo trovava divertente. Io no. Ricordo che una sera tornò a casa senza una mano. Diceva che poteva comunque muoverla all'officina. Era così giovane quando se ne andò. Aveva solo 43 anni. Mi sarebbe piaciuto passare più tempo assieme. Ci amavamo davvero tanto. Puoi immaginare la mia sorpresa quando guardai nel modello di gesto della bocca. Grazie a Dio che l'ispettore Giaffino era nel torto. Mi fece pensare che c'era un serial killer in città, ma nessuno l'aveva ucciso. Thomas aveva tagliato il suo stesso corpo e si era inserito nella libertà. L'ho visto, ogni parte di lui. Sapevo cosa fosse successo, ma vedere i suoi occhi sulla statua era troppo per me. Lei sembrava viva. Giappino disse agli americani che Thomas fosse morto. Credo che lui abbia trovato la verità da allora. La polizia di Gibilterra pensava che sarei stata devastata dal sentire che avessero trovato la pelle di Nina nella grotta. Ma ero sollevata. Sei ancora viva. Thomas deve averla messa nella statua con lui. Dentro la libertà. Thomas e Nina stanno proteggendo l'America. Insieme.
Holy shit. The story of freedom is far more amazing than we could have known. So Crawford was the sculptor, and he wanted to use Giza glass in the statue's sword. However, Crawford found out about Giza's glass ability for the victim to stay connected and alive despite being cut up. So naturally, Crawford was able to cut himself up and plaster himself into the statue. That is how freedom came alive, and his daughter didn't just disappear. She became one with the statue with him. It's so bizarre, and I absolutely love it.
has a new home. Following the ADA storming of the Capitol on January 6th, numerous organizations expressed interest in purchasing the Statue of Freedom. The statue, which fell during the riot and caused over 150 casualties, was seen by reactionary politicians as a result of poor craftsmanship, and blamed her original installer, Philip Reed, for her collapse. Reed, an experienced architect and enslaved man at the time of Freedom's assembly, this has become the latest in a series of historical figures demonized by the ADA. Due to growing reluctance to reinstall the Statue of Freedom, the Department of the Interior has instead transferred Freedom to an undisclosed location in the Grand Canyon and rejected all other offers to purchase her. When asked why the statue had been sent to the Grand Canyon, President Dean replied, "The rocks won't shoot her down."
No, no, not now. I'm leaving now. I won't bother you.
So let's take this step by step. First, the Delaware Journal was in a video that we won't cover in this video, but I encourage you to watch yourself. However, it seems that the government wanted it to shut down because Mays is the only media the people need. Then we were told that the ADA knocked down the Statue of Freedom to preserve it. President Dean relocated Freedom to the Grand Canyon. But later on, a journalist leaked out the classified project STFR 4.3099. This government operation reveals that Mays is completely controlled by the government, and that the government wanted the statue to fall so they could move it to the Grand Canyon to lure, attack, and behead the opposition of James Dean. So is the ADA even real, or are these attacks by them being orchestrated by the government to get more and more control? Regardless, it's frightening to know that in Dean's democracy, you can be shipped to the Grand Canyon for speaking out against the president. And here's the scariest part. Freedom's sword is Giza glass, which means those victims didn't die. Their severed heads are alive and conscious somewhere in the Grand Canyon. But for what purpose? Our next video we're going to cover tonight is called Starry Sphinx, and is probably the most bizarre video visually in this series. So let's begin. It starts with a video of something called the TMFD, which we've heard of before, and it's on the surface of Mars. But didn't our government create the TFMDs? Then we get a recording from a man titled the former senior advisor of some organization. Let's take a listen.
Egypt was entirely against excavation. They had every right to be upset when we went ahead with it anyway. They said that their system worked for thousands of years and would continue to protect the country. They're right. At the time, the president and our military did not care. They viewed their solution as a problem and desperately needed a better solution. American solution. Which in this case was excavation.
Then our video tells us that the TMFD has left Mars. In this next video, we can see something leaving Mars that looks like some kind of ship flying out of orbit.
Once the pyramids were classified as TFMDs by the U.S., the excavation was inevitable. TFMDs have been acknowledged by the UN Security Council as the single most dangerous threat to humanity. Of course, this was before climate change and mankind was classified as TFMDs under the new administration. At the time, it meant that the pyramids required immediate action.
Apparently all the pyramids in Egypt are TMFDs, which isn't surprising after what happened in the Suez Canal. And it seems the rest of the world in this alternate reality are aware of them, and know they have to be dealt with, until our best friend and fearless leader, President Dean, changed that. So why did Dean think they aren't a threat anymore? Let's keep watching. In these next satellite camera shots, we can see the ship from Mars entering Earth's atmosphere. Then our former senior advisor gives us some more insight. Let's listen. So we've been given an enormous history lesson about the special trees. They just don't exist, they are spreading, and have been since all the way back to the Egyptians. Since they didn't have the valuable Giza glass, the only way they could control these trees were to build the pyramids around them, continuing the idea that this series is built off of, that all these monuments have a purpose to combat or control these existential terrors. But we also learned why the Americans created the Giza Guardians. They aren't cutting down the trees. They want them in the wild to grow taller, not spread. But for what reason, I have no idea. Let's keep watching. This next camera footage is hard to make out, but my guess is that either humans or the pyramids are using some kind of weaponry to attack this alien spacecraft that has entered Earth's orbit. Let's go back to this advisor and see what he has to say.
Within the first week of excavation, we found the pyramids extended much deeper into the sand than we had previously thought. The more we dug, the more bricks we had found had already been laid. At the time, we had convinced ourselves that the pyramids had these hidden structures, and it would only be a matter of time before we would reach the bottom. By the third week, we realized that we had been wrong the whole time. The pyramids extended down infinitely. You can imagine our reluctance to tell the public that the pyramids were not pyramids at all. There were towers, infinite towers, all three of them, towers which contained enormous species of metaphysical flora. Who knew that the pyramids were merely the tips of buildings?
So the Americans discovered the pyramid monuments aren't pyramids. They are infinite towers that spiral down into Earth. So do all the special trees do this underground? And did President Dean know this? Let's keep watching. The next footage tells us that the TMFD's false children landed. So what are false children? We see orbs of light covering the Sphinx until we see an enormous explosion of light. Then our video tells us that these false children has turned the Sphinx into the Starry Sphinx. We see hundreds of these false children surround the Sphinx before we are then told that they are meant to distract us from the mothership. So now at the end, it seems this alien spacecraft came to activate the special trees inside the pyramids, and when they rose from the ground, what do they look like? The Washington Monument. So the American government based the Washington Monument on the pyramids of Egypt decades ago. And even more frightening, It isn't just 3 pyramids, because at the end we see hundreds of special trees buried underground around the Sphinx. These things are inevitable at this point, and it doesn't seem like President Dean is concerned with trying to stop them. And to make things worse, they are using the only true weapon, the Giza glass, to try and control these unstoppable forces as well as their own people. Let's move on to our last video for tonight, which is probably the most dramatic of the entire channel, Washington Wonderland. It begins with a quote saying, "After an unsuccessful lobotomy, Virginia Fate Arnoldson provided a more complete account of the Rockefeller Tree tragedy." So we're following the same Virginia from the end of my first video again, and apparently someone doesn't want her speaking if they try to lobotomize her. Let's take a listen.
When I was little, something went wrong with me, and everything switched. Even my parents. My new ones did not like me, so they left me. My foster parents did not like me either, so I was left at an orphanage. Some of my friends were better off, but many were left at the orphanage too. We loved each other. We stuck together until we were 18. Then we were separated. The military took the boys, and the doctors took the girls. They probably do not remember the tree anymore. Soon, I will not remember either. But I hope you will remember. Remember for me. When the tree changed me, I was not scared. At first, I did not know what was wrong with me. When my eyes adjusted, I was in a field of special trees. I was reminded of a story my ma told me. Alice in Wonderland. This was my Wonderland. I held myself close and looked up. The trees looked like they ended, but above them there were upside-down trees, and above those there were upright trees, like they were being reflected forever. The pattern repeated for as far as I could see. I looked down, and I thought I was on solid ground, but when I looked more closely, I was sitting on a thin, floating layer of dust. It smelled like baby powder. And through the dust, I could see the start of another tree. And below that one, there was another and another, an infinity of trees. While I played with the dust, I heard distant footsteps. They grew louder and louder. Then there were bright flashes of light all around me. Out from these lights, hundreds of people ran out. One man came up to me and whispered, "The trees are not the trees." He had such sad, tired eyes. As he picked me up and put me on his shoulders, he said, "You could be her. Anyone could be her. I promise I will not leave you." There was a bright flash, and we were in another field. He was sitting in front of me with his hands out. Another flash, and we were both running past through the woods. Another flash, and we were both lying on the ground, looking at infinity. Every few seconds there was a flash, and we would be doing something else. Again, and again, and again. Over and over and over. It would not stop. It felt like forever. Years of flashes. I was so angry at first. But soon I had those sad, tired eyes of his too. We were so sad and tired. Every now and then we would flash to another layer of dust, above or below, who knows. But we would always see the climbers. I think there were people who tried to climb the trees while they were flashed around. They were stretched and burnt. Maybe the dust was the people that fell. The man was always with me. He kept me safe the whole time. It must have been years. It felt like 500 years. I named him Everett. He was always there. He never left me. Everett was my best friend. Then on one random day, no time, one random time, all the trees bent, and a flash brought me back to New York. All my friends were around me, but this was another New York.
So now Virginia isn't a little girl. She's grown up, and we can get a more accurate account of what happened to her on Christmas Eve. Virginia didn't just get sent to an alternate reality because of the special trees. She was snapped out of all realities for centuries, never growing old, never aware of time. And her only solace was another trapped human named Everett. But if this is where the special trees that litter the world send humans when they bend and flash, what do they get out of it? Is this the master plan, or is it just nature that they do this to humans? Let's keep following Virginia after she entered the James Dean alternate reality.
I did something wrong, and I lost Everett. I ruined everything. I should have stayed home that night. Why did I not stay home? I lost everything. For me and my friends, I ruined their lives. I will not tell you about the orphanage. It was a hard time. I will keep memories of the orphanage to myself. They do not matter to you. When I was 18, I left the orphanage. I looked for my new parents. They were not together anymore. My new pa died from a broken heart, and my new ma lived all by herself. She did not let anyone into her house anymore. All because of me. I wanted my old parents back. I went to the Rockefeller Center for an answer. The tree stood at the top of the plaza, above everyone else. I was never supposed to visit again, but I did, and I spoke to her. At first, I could not understand her. Her voice was like a breeze behind my eyes. It was cold, and I could not move. But soon, I could understand. She said that I had to be ready to exchange one life for my own. She understood that I wanted to go back home, to my New York. She said, come back in 3 years. And I did. I waited 1,095 days.
So the special trees that we know aren't actually trees can become living entities hiding in public. And Virginia is ready to make a deal with this creature in order to go back to her reality. But these 3-year gaps are insanely long, and people change in that amount of time. So let's see how Virginia handles waiting those 3 years.
I returned 3 years later. At first, I could not understand her. Her voice was like a breeze behind my eyes. It was cold, and I could not move. But eventually, I could understand. She said that I had to be ready to exchange one life for my own. She understood that I wanted to go back home, to my New York. She said, come back in 3 years. And I did. I waited 1,095 days. I returned 3 years later. At first, I could not understand her. Her voice was like a breeze behind my eyes. It was cold and I could not move. But eventually I could understand. She said that I had to be ready to exchange one life for my own. She understood that I wanted to go back home, to my New York. She said, come back in 3 years. And I did. I waited 1,095 days. While I waited, I met a man. He was a very important man, a secret agent. He followed me everywhere. One day, I found him waiting inside my house. He told me that he was here to monitor me. No, to watch and protect me. But he had fallen in love with me. No one else liked me. So we took each other. We grew close. Leonard loved me. I loved him too. Together, we had a baby boy. I named him Everett. Little Everett was inside for 9 months when I saw the tree again. She put directions in my head. I followed those directions. I walked for 4 days. I had to. I wanted to go home so badly. But I became so happy when I could hear the music. It was like the tree's voice, but warm. The Washington Monument looked much bigger in person. Its door went up high, like it was for something much bigger. Then I went inside. There were bodies everywhere. The breeze told me to relax. I went on the elevator. It went up. All the way up. It stopped at the top, and the music blared. It was so loud I could not move. The floor opened, and I fell all the way down. I felt myself hit the ground. Then I kept drifting down, past the ground, past rock, sand, and magma, through the layers of earth. It must have been years. It felt like 500 years. Then I reached the other side, and I felt myself rising through all the layers of earth, past the magma, sand, and rock, past the ground, back into a body, another body, almost the same body, and flattened like a little red pancake. But I felt so empty. My belly had sunk. Little Everett was not with me anymore. Many others laid around me, broken like me, almost alive and completely still. But little Everett was nowhere. While everyone else exchanged for their own lives, themselves, I must have exchanged little Everett for mine. I cried. I cried for years. We all bled into the ground for years. Why did the tree keep us alive? Did they like pain? Did they drink our blood? Was there any reason for any of it? I lost little Everett. He had no say. He did not even say his first word. I ruined his life from the start. Maybe he lives in Wonderland. I hope he lives in Wonderland. One day, one random day, the music grew, and there was the brightest flash. We found ourselves outside, at the base of the tower. The tree had been freed, and we were in a field of trees. Wonderland had risen, but little Everett was still missing. We were all lifted out in helicopters. I was at the hospital faster than ever before. They told me it was 2003. They told me everything I knew was wrong. They told me everyone I knew was dead. And now they plan to fix me. I'm sorry, Pa. I'm sorry, Ma. I'm sorry, friends. I'm sorry, Leonard. I'm sorry, Everett. Please remember me. Please, please remember me.
Virginia sacrificed her own child to the special trees within the Washington Monument, making her one of the 20 victims of the monument we saw in our part 1. She's been through hell, and like she said, what even was the point of it all? Why are the trees doing this to humans? A question I doubt we'll ever get an answer to, but at the end there we learned Virginia awoke in 2003, which if we remember from the part 1 video was the same year the special tree in the Washington cut. Which if we remember from the part 1 video was the same year the special tree in the Washington Monument broke out. And it must have spread if Virginia had to be helicoptered out of DC. But it seems that when Virginia began to ask questions, the government realized that she knew too much and wanted her lobotomized. But wasn't this our world she returned to? That's the big reveal of this video. Virginia was never safe from the special trees, and there isn't a reality where they don't spread and cause chaos. And after all those years, and after losing her own child to them, she has realized she can never escape the special trees, and the death of her son was for nothing. And here we are with another twist. Virginia died in 1980, not past 2003. While that opens up a can of worms itself, we are also told the answer to one of the mysteries we discovered in my part 1 video. At the beginning of Washington Wormhole, we were told 20 people went unconscious inside the monument, but at the end of that same video, it said that 19 went unconscious. Now we know that Virginia was the 19th victim, and her son Everett was the 20th, but in order to fully travel between realities and not get stuck in Wonderland, the special trees needed a sacrifice, which I will soon talk about more, but first let's wrap up the heartbreaking story of Virginia. She told us she came out of the monument in 2003, but at the end of the video it tells us she died in the 1980s. So has Virginia actually went insane after traveling through Wonderland in these realities? Or is whoever making these videos lying to us? Which leads us to my conclusion on the first 2 seasons of the Monument Mythos. From everything we've been shown, this alternate history has surrounded these special trees. The Egyptians tried to contain them by building their own Washington monuments that they buried deep into the sand, and it failed. The special trees hid for centuries until the Americans discovered them. That's when we learned about how people started being sacrificed to the trees, all the way back to the Civil War when POWs were taken into the monuments. After the war, when Rockefeller was president, he claimed to know nothing about the trees and their abilities. Now we could just say he was lying because in our world Rockefeller was a viciously evil man. Or which I think is more likely, there is a secret government organization that is operating on behalf of the special trees that not even the president knew about. This would be the same organization that bought all of the Giza glass from the British and commissioned the Freedom Statue to hunt people and bring them into the Grand Canyon. The Giza Guardians were created in order to control the special trees and the people using Giza glass swords, just like the Egyptians. The same organization that built the monuments like the Liberty Lurker, which caused an absolute panic when immigrants smelt the bodies rotting inside. The same organization that realized unless they moved the people's attention to something else, they would begin to uncover the truth. Enter President James Dean, a figure that basically had the public drooling over him, and would listen and agree with everything he would say. And under his presidency, all the media, tech, and scientific corporations were brought together under the Department of Technology. This secret organization has now become an open military-industrial complex that is hell-bent on using these special trees to their benefit. And who is this organization now? Maze Technologies. They control all the media, all the tech the people have, and in the Suez Canal video, they are also controlling social media in this world. But what is the goal of this entire complex? Well, Virginia's story tells us. The special trees don't just have the ability to be forces of mass destruction, they can also be portals to other worlds, and I believe that this military-industrial complex is desperately trying to understand how to utilize that and are willing to do anything to discover the secret power. But where does that leave the ADA, the Anti-Dean Anti-Device Association? Are they truly going against the military-industrial complex? Or worse, are they just another puppet in the show Maze controls? I don't think we're far enough into this story to know yet. And that's the Monument Mythos so far. I'm in love with this series, and I'm glad that my part 1 got as much attention as it did. This series deserves to be at the top, and I'm glad that ALEXKANSAS' channel has grown so much this year. Like I said in my previous video, I've been watching him for years now, and I'm happy to see that his channel got all this attention. Like I say in all my series, I will be watching closely for new content, and we'll be back to talk about what comes next in this series. With tonight's investigation at a close, this has been Pagan Valley, and I wish you all a good evening.